We are so pleased to welcome on set Mark Douglas, who's the fire chief for the town of Kingston. Welcome, Mark, to Town Talk.
Thank you very much, Julie, for having me today.
Thank you for being here today. Today we're going to talk about the emergency response plan that the town of Kingston currently has. Could you give an overview of it?
Sure. As part of our comprehensive emergency management plan, which the state requires you to have, there's a component in that we call the storm response segment module, however you'd like to express it. And it deals with how government emergency services respond to storm emergencies, particularly snow and the cold weather the issues. With heavy snow, high winds, you do experience certainly power outages often in this area. And we needed a plan that clearly showed us and had good workflows in terms of how we deal with those situations. So about 2 years ago, just after our MVP that we did with the consulting company Horsley Witten.
And let me just stop 1 second. The MVP was the Municipal Vulnerability Plan.
Yes.
That I actually sat in on that as a resident, and it was fascinating.
Yeah, it was an excellent way of bringing the community together to define the community's needs.
Exactly,
And some of those needs we pulled from that and incorporate into or give us guidance, use as guidance in development of the storm response plan. Public outreach is one, social media, things like that. How do we contact the public? The most important thing certainly is for the public to be aware themselves. Obviously, we live in the Northeast and it snows in the winter. So that being said, pay attention to the weather, things like that. So there were a lot of things that we drew from the MVP into this planning process. And it was great because we were allowed to use some grant money to employ Horsley Witten, who again did the MVP with us. So it was a very nice, smooth, seamless transition into this part of the plan.
All different groups and different individuals and different organizations have different concerns. There's people that are really concerned about how storms affect your wetlands and the tidal rise and fall, and how do you work all those concerns into a storm response plan?
What we do is we try to, when I said the word module, most planning, at least that we do in the emergency services, is kind of done in modules. You look at the specific, like the pre-storm, the during the storm, the post-storm, the recovery phases, and then you break those down into which department or which group needs to be involved in that particular segment. It's a nice smooth way and it's a nice workflow to develop a plan. And we've done that, and that's something that hadn't been done before. We would pretty much rely on the department heads or the emergency responders' experience to handle whatever was in front of you. In doing or working through this the way we're working through it, we've got, if you're familiar with different charts and so forth, we chart out a lot of things like post-storm or pre-storm, fire chief does this and the police chief does this and highway does this. It's all the preparedness. Then during the storm, you all do your jobs and respond to the emergency. And then after the storm and so on and so forth. A big thing, as I said, was public outreach, and that's a big, big deal with pre-storm planning.
So we'll go to that in 1 second. Will you tell me a little bit about how your position here, how long you've been the fire chief?
Sure. I was, actually, I'll go through it quickly. I grew up here. I started on the department in 1983.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been a while. I was a firefighter until 94. I was captain from 94 till 2006 when I became deputy. From then till 2016, and then I became chief shortly thereafter, and I have been.
So you've seen it all.
Everything Kingston has to offer, certainly.
Okay, so question that always comes to my mind is when there is an event, a storm, whether it's in the summer and you having a hurricane-type storm, or in the winter where we have a lot of blizzards, you only have X amount of people. And I think people tend to forget that you all have families. You all have to sleep at some point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think we as the public sometimes forget that. Can you speak to that?
Sure. There's a whole bunch of information there that I can touch on. First, summer storms are typically easier than winter storms because of the obvious. You don't deal with cold. People are a lot happier hot than they are cold, quite frankly. And the danger issues, obviously, enter into that. But in terms of our families, that is true. Part of the planning process for the storms is rotational crews. We have roughly 25 people within our department, and what I try to express as often as I can to the public is that's our 25. If we're having an emergency, chances are Duxbury and Plymouth and Pembroke, we're all having that emergency. So the thought process of immediate mutual aid and so forth, they're as
the
busy
window,
as we
right,
are. So
right.
what you have is what you have
Right,
oftentimes.
right.
And that's why I talk so much about preparedness, because we are partners. The public has to be somewhat prepared, because
Right.
we're not going to be there 100% with our mutual aid and stuff like we normally would be
Right.
in a house fire or,
Right.
or whatever the case may be.
So let's talk about some of those things that residents how they can help you by being more prepared themselves.
They can first watch the weather and,
Yep.
and be prepared and
Yep.
know what's going to happen. In that, you prepare to have your driveway plowed, your walk shoveled,
Yep.
have your ice melt and all those things. In terms of power loss, home generators are excellent. They're not, I say not that expensive, that's kind of relative.
Yeah.
$1,000, $2,000. But if you can afford it, they're a great tool to get you through a bad situation.
But don't use them in your garage.
Yeah, not in the garage.
Yeah.
Make sure a
Have to be
professional
outside,
electrician
yeah.
wires it, and,
Yeah,
and all those
right.
safety things that go along with it. So that's one thing. Be prepared with food, water, the staples that you need to get through.
Candles, batteries.
Stay away from candles.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Batteries,
Yeah,
then.
batteries
and
and
flashlights.
lights.
Okay.
Yeah, candles, cats, candles, dogs.
Oh,
they don't
true.
always go well. And then if you have a fire, you've got an unfortunate slow response from emergency responders for the storm reason.
Right.
It can turn into a disaster that you'd rather not
Right.
participate in. So the preparedness ahead of time is really important, to know what you're going to do in a storm, to have those staples, like I said, that you need to get you through a couple of 3 days,
Yep.
to pay attention to social media, to pay attention to the Weather Channel and
Yeah.
whatever, to know what's going to go on.
Yep.
That's huge. That's huge.
What about neighborhoods, knowing that, this neighbor over here, I know she has a machine that she needs that runs on electricity that helps her breathe.
Right.
I mean, should neighbors be,
Yeah, we
without
always
being intrusive, can they be
Sure.
advocates for each other?
Sure, absolutely, and you encourage that. It's one thing that I think, and not to be political at all, but I think that's one thing we do really well as a country or as a region. Most of the time, when the chips are down, your neighbors come and
Absolutely.
help, right?
They do.
There's a lot of negatives that said, no, they don't, and they really do, and we see that a lot. The neighbors are, let me go check on Mrs. X,
Yep.
and so forth, and it really is important. In terms of that, we do have a list, and I think you're going to talk to Paula Rossi-Clapp
Yeah.
from Elder Services.
Yeah.
And we do have an ongoing list of people that have special needs, so that we can accommodate or address those needs perhaps pre-storm
Right.
where we need to do that. But not everybody is willing to fill out the form and send it in.
Right,
And
right.
I
Just-
encourage that.
Yeah, because
Certainly.
it can only help you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People are very private, and that's fine,
Yep.
especially the elderly, frankly.
Yep.
And we encourage them, and Paula has done a great job with some outreach to get them to tell us what they need ahead of time. And that makes it so much easier than taking a 911 call in the middle of a storm.
Right, right. Another thing that I always notice, I live in Pembroke, and every time there's a storm, God bless the plows. They're out 3, 4, 5 times. Now, those people, you have a lot of people that do that aren't town employees, right? You contract private people to do that. What about the wear and tear on your actual equipment?
Yeah, storms can be tough on the equipment. We certainly buy equipment knowing that we use it in the Northeast. We buy it from manufacturers with the understanding that they're built in such a way that
Yep.
they tolerate the weather up
Yep.
here. Corrosion has been a big deal over the past few years with the new chemicals they're putting on the road.
Yeah.
And additionally, you talk about all the crews, and it's a point we brought up before. Our families, and we're away from them, and you have crews that you have to rotate and so forth. So at any one time, we probably have a third to half of the department on duty.
Right.
And we try to have another segment of them resting to be prepared for the next rotation.
Yep.
in long duration storms. One of the challenges the superintendent of highway has is, when do you stop plowing?
Right.
Right? I mean, we can rotate crews and stack emergencies a little bit.
Yeah.
You stop plowing, you lose roads. So
Right.
they work very closely with us. If we need a truck to be with us to get access areas, they
Right.
do that for us.
Right.
But they do struggle with that,
Sure.
as we all do. We have
Yeah.
25 people to go 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, and
straight.
you have an awful lot of roads to cover. A lot of, and you have a lot of little
Oh yeah,
little
Yeah.
places.
Yep.
They're not all highways, and yeah.
Yeah, as I said, that's one of the things that's so important in pre-storm planning, is to know who's going to plow, when they're going to
Right.
plow, who's going to shovel, and that stuff.
Yeah.
And that all goes to planning.
Yep.
And we all succeed far better. We have a much more successful story at the end of a storm if people are prepared.
Absolutely. And the last thing is about closing down streets, closing down schools, closing down public buildings. How is that all coordinated? Because I assume you all kind of meet in a war room and coordinate it.
We do. That's part of the pre-storm planning. And one of the things to touch on quickly is sheltering. We work hand in hand with the Red Cross for Silver Lake Regional High School as a regional shelter. And one of the challenges we have is what happens when you can't get to the shelter.
Right.
So we have to coordinate with the highway department primarily and police and so forth, and even Eversource to get a road or a path cleared to the shelter that we can use. So it involves all of the stakeholders, if you will, sitting in a room or at least on a conference call pre-storm and during the storm several times to analyze what's going on and what each of us has to do in terms of our responsibilities to mitigate what's going on.
Right. Now, for shelters, do you have the big, huge generators for the shelters?
Yes, Silver Lake Regional High School has a large diesel generator
Yep.
that's always kept full.
Yeah.
So that
I was just going to ask.
right.
That. I mean, is that something that like people could forget about that?
Yeah.
And if you don't use it for a few years.
So what they do is they have Joy Blackwood, who is the former superintendent, was excellent with us at making sure that generator was full, it was
Yep.
run, it was serviced, and especially in the winter months,
Yeah.
that they were well aware it dropped very little in fuel
Yep.
before they fueled it up, and that usually gave us a couple of days of fuel
Yeah,
to run the generator.
to run it.
Yep.
Is there some place that people can go to in Kingston to get more information about storm preparedness?
What we suggest is going to, and rather than reinvent the wheel per se,
Yeah.
we suggest going to the American Red Cross website.
Okay.
That's an excellent resource. We work very well with them. That's an excellent resource for storm preparedness.
Kind of gives you checklists.
Yeah, and rather than us make up a bunch of stuff that's Kingston specific, this really isn't Kingston specific.
Right.
It's region specific.
Right.
So they have done a great job over the course of many years of perfecting those checklists
Okay.
and needs lists
Yep.
and informational packets. So we always suggest that you use those.
Okay. And the last thing is the gutters, the storm drains.
Storm drains.
I know that ends up being a problem sometimes. And the fire
The fire hydrants.
hydrants, right?
Yeah.
So whose responsibility should that be?
The fire hydrants are really odd. They're really owned by the water department,
okay.
right? But they're fire hydrants, right?
Right.
So what we do is we'll typically go out and shovel. But what we ask neighbors, and you'll see it all over the Facebook pages and the website at the time, is for the neighbors and neighborhoods to go out and shovel your hydrants. It takes a
And
big
they
load
do.
off us. They
And they
do
do.
a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
What they don't get, we do. So what we typically do is at the end of the storm,
Yeah.
we give it probably 24 hours for everybody to rest up, and then we start hydrant details.
Yep.
And that is just endless hydrant shoveling until it's done.
Yeah. Wow. So your work never stops.
Pretty much.
It never stops because you're either reacting to something or planning for something.
Planning
at all
for something.
times.
And the better we plan, I can't stress enough, the better the individuals plan, the better we plan, the better the outcome.
Right. We're all in this together.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Mark Douglas, Fire Chief for Town of Kingston. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
And this has been Town Talk.